Alright, this screencast is going to finish chapter 12. I'm going to be starting with nativism, so if your class had already got beyond this point, you can fast forward. So one response to the growth of immigration, one American response, is nativism. Nativism is favoritism towards native-born Americans over immigrants. You're going to start having some Americans basically calling for limits to immigration because they are starting to kind of become, they're starting to develop like racial superiority complexes and viewing themselves, as like Western European descent Americans as being superior and better than other groups like the Italians, the Russians, the Asians, etc. It will actually be the Asians that are first targeted with an all-out limit, and it's going to be the Chinese specifically. So I mentioned yesterday that China, there are a lot of immigrants coming from China like into America's west coast, and many of those immigrants are finding job opportunities, especially with the construction of the railroad. Because Chinese immigrants are willing to work for less money, many businesses will choose to employ, Chinese laborers over American laborers. And the American laborer views this as kind of a seizure of job opportunities, and they feel very targeted and threatened by that. So they will begin calling for the U.S. government to ban immigration from China, and the government will respond in the 1880s with the Chinese Exclusion Act. This act banned entry to all Chinese immigrants trying to come in, except if you were a doctor or a student or a government official or professor that would only be in the country for a minimal amount of time. If you were just trying to immigrate from China to make a new life in the U.S., you were actually denied access. And that law actually did not get officially repealed until the 1940s. I won't ask you years. I just think it's kind of embarrassing that something like that was allowed to exist for so long. All right. Transitioning to urbanization, which is, in part kind of an effect of increased number of immigrants coming over, but there's also factors happening within the U.S. that cause urbanization. So urbanization, to give you a definition, refers to the growth of cities due to industrialization and immigration. So, there's a technological boom happening in the U.S., which means there's a lot of job opportunities with factories being constructed, etc. So that's pulling a lot of Americans just out of the rural areas into the cities, but it's also, again, kind of the location that many immigrants will settle because that is where they will find the most job opportunities overall. So in terms of just urban opportunities, immigrants will settle in cities. Again, cities are the cheapest and most convenient places to live at the time. It's a little bit different today, but that's how it was going back then. And offering them steady jobs in factories and mills. You do have, as I mentioned, just to give more detail on it, a lot of migration happening from the country, rural areas of the U.S. into the cities. Part of industrialization is that the farm sector and the farming industry saw a development of tools and resources and farming equipment, and that actually took away the need to have so many people at the job. So some people get laid off because they don't need to find the same work opportunities, or they can't find the same work opportunities they had with farming. So it's helping the farmer, the owner of producing more crops at a faster rate, but causing people to be at loss with jobs. There are a lot of problems that kind of emerge from urbanization. just with the, really kind of increased population boom in the cities specifically, some negative effects will kind of happen. Some I think are fairly obvious. You probably could have guessed them, but we'll address a few of those right now. So the first problem is housing. The reality is that there's just not a lot of space. Like, when you have such a big booming in population, you find situations where families, like multiple families, are sharing like small apartment rooms. One option is like you could have like row houses, which is again just like a basically small apartment. Everything's connected to each other. No like single standing homes or anything like that. And a lot of times, like with people living in such close quarters, that's like a good, unfortunate, like environment that like, illness and disease will spread quickly and easily. And then some families will move outside of the city, like to the outskirts of town, but that causes problems with the next thing, transportation. When people are finding, their way outside of the city, they need a method to find like a ride into town for work. It's not easy just to walk from point A to point B. And this is kind of when you start seeing the movements of mass transit, systems like relocation into the cities. But there will be, issues of a shortage of transportation systems available. The construction process takes a long time. There's a lot of repairs that need to be made. It's a lot of trial and error in the beginning, but eventually, obviously, mass transit systems like the electric streetcar, that you see on the screen, it's really necessary for people who are kind of on the outskirts to make it into town for work. Water and sanitation, also issues. It's just hard to get, safe drinking water in the cities, and really not just for drinking, but for cooking, for bathing, and that's kind of disgusting to think about, but that's just the reality. They don't have like water treatment facilities like the things we have today. We don't really get them until we see the need for them, which is a lot of times happening during urbanization. Also with sanitation, you don't have necessarily like trash pickup systems in the beginning, so a lot of people are just throwing their litter into the streets. And then, a rainstorm would come in and just drag it through the town. So that's pretty disgusting. You often, just had, like, smoke from the factories, like, just kind of going full speed, sewage floating down the street. I mean, eventually cities will create, like, sewer lines and sanitation systems, but they didn't exist in the beginning. Also, as the number of people increase in the cities, crime also goes up. So you have pickpockets, thieves. New York City is actually the first city in the U.S. to have like a organized full-time police force, but think about like why that was necessary. And then the last problem we're going to talk about, and I have an example for this one, is fire. The issue here is that you have a limited water supply in the cities, and you have buildings obviously constructed very, very close together, which means that one small fire could cause a lot of damage. And that's often what happened. And like the most well-known example of this is the Great Chicago Fire, which happens in the 1870s. Approximately 300 people were killed. 3 square miles of the city were just completely destroyed. This is going to eventually cost about, $200 million in damages. It's going to leave, hundreds of, 100,000 people homeless. Today, Chicago is actually known as like the second city because they basically had to like rebuild a large portion of it like at this time. All right, so take note of all these issues that are coming from urbanization. This is what will be gained for the quiz tomorrow, but I will be in chapter 13 kind of addressing the progressive era, which is going to be in many cases like the answer to all these problems, different moves Americans were making to try to improve all the dangerous effects of immigration, urbanization, industrialization. All right, write down any questions you have and please email me as we do have a quiz tomorrow. I will see you all tomorrow.